A strand of pearls sitting in a dresser drawer since before 1970 can be worth more than the house it's sitting in. The exact same looking strand priced at $8 on a card table at an estate sale because it looked just like the fake ones at the mall can end up quietly paying for a stranger's kitchen renovation instead of yours. The difference between those two outcomes has nothing to do with how big the pearls look, how perfectly round they are, or how expensive the clasp looks under a lamp. It comes down to one detail almost everybody skips without realizing they're skipping it. Not a signature, not a stamp, a tiny hole drilled almost a century ago that most people have never once looked at closely in their entire lives. 13 pieces, one habit. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly which types of pearl jewelry to hunt for in your own jewelry box. Which pieces look so ordinary that most people walk straight past them at a yard sale, and roughly what each one might actually be worth in today's market. Including 2 pieces near the very end of this list that are almost too strange to believe until you hear the actual auction numbers behind them. Before we get into the list, build one habit right now, because everything in this video depends on it. Don't just look at the pearls, look at the clasp, look at the drill hole, and if you can manage it, look at the pearls under a strong light with a magnifier. That's the entire secret hiding underneath nearly 200 years of pearl jewelry. A beautiful-looking strand with a cheap-feeling clasp and pearls that all look identical is almost always worth a few dollars, no matter how good it looks around a neck. The exact same length, the exact same color, but with a heavy gold clasp, a slightly irregular shape to the pearls, and a drill hole positioned in a very specific way can be worth hundreds, sometimes tens of thousands of dollars to the right buyer. Nobody teaches you this, and nobody in the modern jewelry business has any reason to tell you either. Mall jewelry counters make their money selling you brand new cultured strands with a certificate and a bow. Nobody in that industry benefits from you finding out that a plain-looking strand gathering dust in your grandmother's jewelry box might be worth more than anything sitting under their glass counter right now. And this isn't some niche hobby that only a handful of collectors care about. Natural and vintage pearl jewelry has become one of the quietest, fastest-growing corners of the fine jewelry auction market over the last several years. Driven largely by a generation that grew up watching their mothers and grandmothers wear strands exactly like the ones sitting untouched in millions of American homes right now. That demand is precisely why a handful of pearl pieces that would have been shrugged off a decade ago are now pulling 5 and 6 figures at auction. So we're doing this differently. We're starting with the pieces so ordinary looking that people genuinely believe they're costume jewelry, and working our way up to 2 of the strangest, most talked about pearl stories in modern auction history. Number 13. Pearl necklaces. If you grew up in America, there's a real chance you either had one of these or watched a friend build one. A single strand started nearly bare, with one real cultured pearl added as a gift for a birthday, a christening, or a holiday, slowly filling in over 10 or 15 years until it became a complete necklace. It's one of the most quietly common family traditions in the entire country, which is exactly why almost nobody thinks to check what they actually have once the tradition is finished and the necklace ends up in a drawer. Most pearl strands use standard Akoya cultured pearls, and a completed strand in good condition with a solid gold clasp typically sells in the $100 to $400 range at resale. The detail that decides it here is completion and consistency. A full strand where every pearl closely matches in size, color, and luster was assembled carefully over years by someone who cared. And it holds real value specifically because that kind of patient consistency is difficult to fake or rush. If you have one of these tucked away from your own childhood, it's worth more than the sentimental value alone. Number 12. Art Deco flapper era pearl ropes. Long, sometimes extremely long, strands of pearls meant to be looped once or twice around the neck and left hanging well past the waist, the exact look you picture from the 1920s. These were a specific fashion statement of that decade, designed to move and swing with the dropped waistlines and fringe of the era. And genuine examples from the period are considerably harder to find intact than people assume, since so many were later shortened or restrung into more modern lengths as fashion changed. An authentic 1920s pearl rope in original uncut length, with its original clasp or slide, can sell well into four figures when a collector confirms the age and originality. The detail that decides it is length and clasp style specifically. A slide clasp or a barrel clasp positioned mid-strand, rather than a simple hook at the very ends, is a strong sign the piece was never cut down, and that alone can double what an otherwise identical shortened strand would bring. Number 11. Victorian and Edwardian seed pearl jewelry. This is the piece most likely to get thrown into a box marked junk without a second look, because seed pearls are tiny, often slightly irregular, and set into designs that look almost too delicate and old-fashioned to be valuable. That's exactly the mistake. Seed pearls are simply very small natural pearls, most of them under 2 millimeters, and before large-scale pearl culturing existed. Jewelers hand-sewed hundreds or even thousands of them onto tiny mother-of-pearl frames to create brooches, bracelets, and hair combs. This was extraordinarily labor-intensive work done entirely by hand, and it stopped almost completely once cultured pearls became widely available in the early 20th century, which is exactly why surviving pieces in good condition are so much rarer than people assume. Look for a mother-of-pearl backing card visible through gaps in the pearls, tiny individual pearls sewn rather than glued, and a slightly yellowed antique patina rather than a bright modern white. A signed or clearly attributable Victorian seed pearl brooch in stable condition typically sells in the $300 to $900 range. And larger pieces like a full seed pearl necklace or a matched bracelet and brooch set have sold for over $2,500 at specialty estate auctions. Number 10. Baroque and freshwater pearl brooches set in sterling silver. Baroque pearls are the irregularly shaped ones, lumpy, asymmetrical, sometimes almost sculptural rather than perfectly round, and this is precisely why people mistake them for cheap or damaged. A perfectly round pearl was always the rarer, more expensive outcome in nature, which meant mid-century jewelers frequently used Baroque. And freshwater pearls specifically, because their irregular shapes allowed for more creative sculptural settings than a plain round pearl ever could. Turn the piece over and look for a sterling silver stamp, sometimes alongside a small designer's mark, since silver settings from this era were often reserved for a jeweler's better work rather than mass production. A signed sterling silver Baroque pearl brooch in good condition typically sells in the $150 to $400 range. And pieces with an unusually large or dramatically shaped central pearl have sold for significantly more when the right collector is bidding. Number 9. The single strand of grandma pearls with a gold filigree clasp. If you picture pearl jewelry in your head right now, this is almost certainly what you're picturing, a single strand, medium-sized, slightly cream-colored, worn to church, to weddings, to funerals for 50 or 60 years straight. And this is exactly the piece people are most likely to donate without a second thought, because it looks like exactly what a department store sells today for $60. Before the 1960s, a huge number of these ordinary strands were genuine cultured Akoya pearls from Japan, individually hand-knotted onto silk thread with a solid gold or gold filigree clasp that was often worth more on its own than the entire piece is assumed to be worth today. If you run a strand through your fingers and feel a small, firm knot between every pearl, that's Your first clue: you're not looking at a modern costume strand strung on plain wire. A well-preserved strand of vintage Akoya cultured pearls with a marked gold clasp commonly sells in the $200 to $600 range at estate auctions. And strands with unusually fine matching and a signed clasp from a known jeweler have sold for well over $1,500. Even though to most people they look exactly like the pearls at a department store counter. Number 8. Mid-century pearl and diamond cocktail rings. This is where the money starts getting serious. A pearl set into a ring surrounded by small clear stones gets written off constantly as costume jewelry, because the owner assumes those small clear stones are rhinestones. In a huge number of estate pieces from the 1940s through the 1960s, they aren't. They're old mine-cut or single-cut diamonds, cut by hand before modern faceting equipment existed, which means they don't sparkle with the same fire as a modern diamond under artificial light, something that trips up far more people than it should. Genuine diamonds from this era were almost always prong-set individually into solid gold or platinum, never glued flat into a base metal mounting the way costume rhinestones are. Look for a hallmark stamped inside the band, something like 14 carat, 18 carat or plat. A signed or hallmarked mid-century pearl and diamond cocktail ring in good condition commonly sells in the $600 to $1,800 range. And rings with an unusually large center pearl or an especially fine diamond halo have sold for well over $4,000 at auction. Number 7. Coco Chanel's signature glass pearl sautoirs. Here's the part that confuses almost everyone the first time they hear it. These pearls are not real, and they are still worth a genuine fortune. Coco Chanel deliberately popularized faux pearls in the 1920s as a bold fashion statement rather than an imitation of wealth. Famously layering long ropes of oversized glass pearls known as sautoir over simple day dresses, specifically to prove that a woman didn't need real jewels to look extraordinary. The value here has nothing to do with the pearl itself, and everything to do with the house that made it, the era it was made in, and whether it carries an authentic Chanel signature. Look for a small oval or round tag, sometimes reading Chanel, and a copyright symbol hanging discreetly near the clasp. A long-signed Chanel glass pearl sautoir from the 1980s or earlier commonly sells in the $400 to $1,000 range. And rarer pieces tied to a specific documented runway collection have sold for well over $3,000 at dedicated vintage couture auctions. Number 6. Signed Tiffany & Company pearl pieces. The Tiffany name alone changes the market for a piece the moment it's confirmed, because a Tiffany signature means the pearls were selected, matched, and set by a house with a reputation to protect on every single strand it sold. Tiffany pearl jewelry sold from the mid-20th century onward ranges enormously in price, depending on whether the pearls are natural or cultured. But signed cultured strands with the original clasp and Tiffany hallmark regularly sell between $800 and $3,500. While natural pearl pieces with Tiffany provenance and proper certification have sold for well into 5 figures at major auction houses, the detail that decides it is the clasp signature specifically, along with the original Tiffany blue box or pouch if it happens to have survived alongside the piece, since either one significantly increases both the certainty of authenticity and the final price. Number 5. Signed Mikimoto pieces from the mid-20th century. Mikimoto is the name that essentially built the modern cultured pearl industry, and yet an enormous number of genuine Mikimoto pieces sit unrecognized in jewelry boxes because people assume a famous name like that could never end up forgotten in a drawer. Kokichi Mikimoto spent years perfecting the culturing process before successfully producing the world's first commercially viable cultured pearls in the early 1900s, and The company's mid-century pieces sold through department stores and specialty jewelers across the United States from the 1950s through the 1970s were genuinely high quality, even by today's standards. Look on the clasp itself, not the pearls, for a small stamp reading Mikimoto, sometimes alongside a pearl, logo or the letter M. A signed Mikimoto strand in good condition regularly sells in the $500 to $1,200 range, and rarer designs, like a graduated strand or a piece with the original box and certificate intact, have climbed well past $2,000 at auction. Number 4. Tahitian and South Sea black pearl pieces. Most people who own one of these has no idea what they're actually holding because a dark grey or black. Pearl doesn't match the mental image most Americans have of what a real pearl is supposed to look like. Tahitian pearls, cultured almost exclusively around French Polynesia, and South Sea pearls, cultured off the coasts of Australia and Southeast Asia, are naturally larger and far rarer than standard Akoya pearls, and their coloring ranges from deep charcoal to an iridescent peacock green that shifts depending on the light. Genuine pearls feel slightly cool and faintly gritty when rubbed gently against a front tooth, while glass and plastic imitations feel perfectly smooth. A single strand of genuine Tahitian pearls in good condition regularly sells in the $800 to $2,500 range. And exceptionally large, well-matched South Sea strands have sold for well over $10,000 at specialty pearl auctions. Number 3. Signed Cartier pearl pieces. Of every signature name on this entire list, Cartier consistently pushes the highest ceiling because a confirmed Cartier piece is being bid on by collectors who care as much about the maison as they do about the pearls themselves. Cartier pearl jewelry spans an enormous range, from a pendant in the low thousands to natural saltwater pearl and diamond earrings that have sold at auction for over $200,000. And a certified Cartier saltwater pearl necklace, over a century old, still in its original box, has been valued at $50,000 on its own. The detail that decides it is the signature stamp, usually reading Cartier along with a serial number on the clasp or a nearby fitting, combined with any surviving original packaging, since Cartier boxes and pouches are themselves collected and authenticated separately from the jewelry inside them. If a piece in your family has ever been described as from Cartier, even as a half-remembered rumor, it is worth a proper appraisal before anyone assumes that story was exaggerated. Now, before the final two, here's what actually connects every piece we've covered so far, because the pattern matters more than any single item on this list. Every one of these pieces was designed at some point in its history to be worn casually, without ceremony, as an ordinary, everyday piece of jewelry, rather than something locked away and treated as precious. That's exactly what makes them so easy to dismiss today. The ad a pearl strand hides behind being a childhood keepsake nobody revisits. The flapper rope hides behind looking like a costume piece from an old movie. Seed pearl jewelry hides behind looking too delicate and old-fashioned to matter. The grandma strand hides behind looking exactly like something modern and inexpensive. Diamond cocktail rings hide behind small stones people assume are rhinestones. Chanel hides behind pearls that everybody already knows aren't real. Tiffany, Mikimoto, and Cartier hide behind a stamp nobody thinks to check on a clasp instead of the pearls. And Tahitian strands hide behind a color that doesn't match what people expect a pearl to look like. Every single one of them is hiding for a different reason, and every single one of them is found the exact same way, by actually stopping to look closely instead of glancing and moving on. Which brings us to the two strangest stories on this entire list. Number 2. Celebrity provenance pearls, and the single strand that changed how the entire industry thinks about fake jewelry forever. In 1996, the estate of Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis went to auction at Sotheby's. And among the pieces sold was her signature triple-strand pearl necklace, the exact style she wore constantly throughout her time as First Lady. Every single pearl in that necklace was glass, faux, costume, worth perhaps a few dollars in raw material. Sotheby's pre-auction estimate for the piece was $500 to $700. It sold for $211,500. Not because of the pearls, because of exactly whose neck they had rested on, and the documented unbroken provenance proving it. This changed how the entire jewelry auction world thinks about celebrity provenance pieces, and it means a strand of pearls, real or otherwise, tied to a documented famous owner with paperwork to prove it, can be worth more than almost anything else on this entire list, regardless of what the pearls themselves are actually made of. The detail that decides it here isn't a stamp or a drill hole. It's paperwork, letters, photographs, a family story that can actually be traced and documented, because provenance without proof is just a nice story, while provenance with proof is a number with several zeros on the end of it. And finally, number 1, the piece at the very top of this list, natural, non-cultured pearls hiding inside an ordinary-looking strand. Most people hear the word pearl and assume every single pearl they own was grown on a farm. And for the overwhelming majority of pearls made after the 1920s, that assumption is correct. But a meaningful number of older strands, especially anything passed down from a family that had money before the First World War, contain wild, naturally occurring pearls that were never cultured at all, formed entirely by chance inside an oyster with no human intervention whatsoever. These are exceedingly rare, and the value gap between a natural pearl and a cultured one of similar size and appearance is not small. It can be the difference between a few $100s and well over $100,000. The only reliable way to tell the two apart without professional lab equipment involves the drill hole. A jeweler's loupe or strong magnifier pointed directly into the drill hole of a natural pearl will typically show faint, irregular concentric growth rings, formed slowly over years with no man-made nucleus at the center, while a cultured pearl's drill hole reveals a noticeably uniform bead nucleus sitting right at the core. This is genuinely difficult to assess with total confidence at home, which is exactly why any strand suspected of being natural belongs in front of a certified gemological lab before it goes anywhere near a sale, since a formal identification report from a lab like GIA can be the single document that separates a $300 sale from a six-figure one. A certified natural pearl necklace has sold at major auction houses for well into six figures, and even smaller individual natural pearls, once separated out and certified, have sold in the tens of thousands of dollars each. Now let me be completely honest with you, because that's the only reason this channel works the way it does. Not every strand of pearls in a senior's jewelry box is worth a fortune, and it would be dishonest to let you believe otherwise. Condition changes everything. Discoloration, peeling nacre, and a broken or missing clasp can cut a piece's value down to a small fraction of what a well-preserved example brings. Rarity matters just as much. A common mass-produced cultured strand, even one that technically meets every mark of quality, may still only be worth a modest amount if millions of nearly identical strands were produced during the same decades. And because pearls in particular are so easy to imitate convincingly with glass and plastic, this is one of the categories where a confident-sounding assumption at home can be dead wrong in either direction. So if you genuinely believe you may have found something significant, especially anything you suspect could be natural rather than cultured, or anything with a real documented celebrity or family history behind it, it's worth having an independent gemologist or a certified lab confirm it before you try to sell. But here's the math that makes this worth your time anyway. Pulling a strand out of a drawer, running it through your fingers, and looking closely at the clasp costs you nothing. No appointment, no fee, no expertise, just a few minutes in decent light with a magnifier if you happen to have one. Selling a genuine Mikimoto strand, a signed Cartier piece, or a natural pearl necklace for a few dollars. At a yard sale, because nobody bothered to look closely, costs you everything that piece was actually worth. So before anything else from that jewelry box goes into a donation bag, a scrap pile, or a $5 folding table in somebody's driveway, take the time to look at every single strand, every clasp, and every drill hole you can find. Tell me in the comments which of these 13 pieces you found in your own collection, and describe it if you can. I read every comment on these videos, and whatever else you do this week, don't sell anything from that box until you've checked.